2 hours to work on this one because this is not one to start at 9 o'clock on Sunday night. Okay, lab is showing as ready. Awesome. Okay. So Module 10 Challenge Lab, Automatic Infrastructure Deployment. So our friends in the cafe want to implement infrastructure as code. So what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to implement infrastructure as code. In order to implement infrastructure as code, we need to use code to actually do our deployments. So the cafe now has multiple locations in multiple countries. They're doing really, really well now. And now they have a bigger problem is how do you actually manage this really complex environment? So they need a way to consistently deploy, manage, and update cafe resources across multiple AWS services across multiple regions in multiple countries. So they've got really big, really complex environment. They want to be able to reliably create repeatable environments across AWS regions to serve both development and production needs. Sounds like a reasonable thing to ask for. So our challenge lab, what we're going to be doing today, and this is where this is going to be the lots of moving parts and lots of things to do. We're going to create an AWS CloudFormation template from scratch using YAML. We're going to configure Oliver's favorite thing. Configure the buckets as a website and update the stack. Clone a code commit repository that contains AWS CloudFormation templates. So we're going to be doing some Git. We're going to create a new network layer with AWS CloudFormation, Cloud Commit, and Cloud Pipeline. Cloud Pipeline is one I sort of alluded to in the lecture of a way to link CloudFormation pieces together. We're going to update the network stack. We're going to define an EC2 instance resource, create an application stack. And then for the icing on top of the cake, we're going to duplicate the cafe network and website to another AWS region. And that's actually the fastest and easiest step of the whole lab this week. So lots to do. What our final product is going to look like. Now we're starting to get into a more complex product. So let me pull up my wonderful little annotation tool. So we're going to create an S3 stack. That's our first part. That's going to be our custom YAML that we're going to write. They're nice, and they're actually going to give us the YAML for creating most of the network stack and most of the app stack. So that one, we just have to do some edits on it. When we run those using CloudFormations, they will then create an EC2 instance, public subnet, cafe VPC, internet gateway in region 1, and have items in the system manager parameter store associated with that. Once we have all that built and our scripts tested and working properly, then we're going to leverage what we just did. We're going to copy the information that we did in this S3 stack to use to create a duplicate in another region using the scripts that we had already generated. But what's cool is we just have to use 2 scripts that will then generate this whole environment on the other side. So everything that we've created here, basically we can reuse over in creating our region 2, and we'll make it really pretty straightforward to create region 2. Let's go do this. Okay, so what we're digging into. Proverbial AWS going, you were just in here, you can't come back in. Okay, so we're starting in our AWS Management Console. First thing they're going to have us do is we're going to dive into Cloud9 and we're going to build some YAML. So what we want to do is we are going into Cloud9. They're nice enough and already have an environment set up for us to go play in. So we're going to go into our Cloud9 environment, open in Cloud9. Welcome screen. Okay, first thing that there's a couple things that the lab documentation will lead you astray. So be careful, and I will try and help it from tripping you up in a couple ways that it will trip you up. So the first thing it does is we're going to create a new file, and then we want to save it as s3.yaml. Case is important even in naming conventions. So it shows S3, but the S looks like it's lowercase. It's actually uppercase. So what we want to do is we are going to create a file, new file, save as S3 dot YAML. Just one L. Save that. Once we save it, now what it'll do is it'll go put in the color coding associated with YAML for us. And that's going to be really important. And actually, let me push you guys over here because I'm going to need a whole lot of different side stages here to make all this work. So if you guys have a question, please speak up because I have enough screens open right now, and I'll have even more shortly that I may not be able to see if you raise your hand. So just unmute and say, hey, got a question, or what are you doing there? Or I can't quite understand what you're doing, because please interrupt if you have a question. Okay, so what the directions have us doing is they want to put us to put some lines into this YAML script. And as Oliver will attest, YAML is really picky. And so what we have to do is we have to be really careful about our syntax. And they do sort of allude to that a little bit in here and say, well, you can go to the YAML website and actually understand how the YAML syntax works. The other thing that is really, really annoying is if you just do a straight copy and paste, like I'll do the first line as a straight copy and paste and show you what the problem is. It throws extra spaces in, and YAML doesn't like spacing. So ideally what you're going to want to do, rather than having to go through and go, okay, we're going to go through and actually clean this up manually, drop it into a text editor and do that on the side, or do it in Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code will be helpful because it does have, and I will show you what it looks like in Visual Studio Code, is it actually gives you the little lines that actually help keep everything lined up, so you know, make sure you know everything is lined up as needed. Whereas when you're working in IO9, you don't get those, and it's sometimes a little harder when you have a large chunk of code to see what is lined up after something else. Okay, where did my other text editor go? There we go. Yeah, I have two text editors. I have Visual Studio Code up plus the lab document plus this stage over here. So I got a lot of stuff going on. Okay, so we have our that one. There we go. No, that's not the page. Interesting. Okay, so the first part it has is that we're just doing some basics. We're saying AWS template format version. We're saying that we're using an early version, 9.9 of 2010. Don't care about that. Throw a description. Next part we're going to say is we want to add 3 lines to our template. We're going to do resources S3 bucket and type S3 bucket. And this is where the spacing starts becoming important. So, okay, we're going line 3. And so ideally what you want is resources is all the way to the left. S3 is in 2 spaces. Type is in 2 spaces. So it should stack up like that. Okay, next part it says is make sure you keep the correct number of spaces for each indentation level. And it does give you the clue. This is the only time it gives you any clues about how many spaces are actually needed. Rule of thumb is anytime you see an indent, that's a double space. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the other thing it wants us to do is add a description. So what we want to do is add a description for our cafe template. So we're going to put cafe S3 template in our description. And also it's important that after the semicolon, you put a space and then cafe S3 template. Putting it in quotes or not putting it in quotes is one of those weird things. Everything I see says you don't need them, so we'll go without them. Now it's going to have us run a couple lines of code in our bash terminal down here. So I can have it a little more visible. So the first thing we're going to run. Okay, we are doing we want to get our region. Kind of what region we're currently in, and we're currently in US East 1. Cool, we're in the right region. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to from the command line, we're actually going to run a stack. And you may remember from our last lab that we ran in Cloud Formation, we ran a stack, but you can actually run a stack from the command line. Oops. And now it's going, okay, cranky, that it's saying it can't run it. Well, what happened was I didn't actually label it properly somehow. So I need to make sure I name it properly. So somehow mine said untitled S3. But what I need to do is rename that. And when it should have been named was S3, capital S3 YAML. Now it is properly labeled S3 YAML, which is with a capital S. I will up arrow that, rerun that. Now it's saying, warning, invalid length parameter template body value 0. So what we have is we have a spacing issue, the dreaded spacing issue. So something it's not liking as far as spacing. And the information it will give you about that is going to be a little on the obtuse side. So what we need to do is just sort of look at it and go, okay, what is missing there that should be there? So resources, description, cafe S3 template. Why is it not liking? Well, let's see if it wants. Like that. Okay, so remember how I said that YAML is sometimes a little weird? So for this particular description, we do need to keep the quotes around it. For all the other descriptions we're going to do in all the rest of our YAML today, we do not need the quotes around it. And I was curious to see what would happen without the quotes, because I ran it earlier with the quotes and it just worked. But I was in the back of my mind going, well, we didn't use it in the rest of these. Why are we using here? So quotes are required. If you don't put the quotes in, the YAML won't work. When it does work, what you should see is it's going to throw back some JSON at you. So you'll see your wonderful little parentheses and it basically saying, I did some work. So it did some work. So now what we want to do is actually verify that it did something. Because what it was supposed to have done from our script is that from the IDE, we created an EC2 instance or an S3 bucket using CloudFormation. So this should have created an S3 bucket. So to find out if it actually did, we can go back here, go to services, go to S3. And we look at our buckets, and now we have this create bucket that was just created by our script. So we're good. Okay, so now we can go, it'll ask you to go through some questions. Now what we want to do is we're going to configure the bucket to actually be a static website. So we're going to go back to Cloud9. Now we're going to run a couple scripts. The first script is going to be a wget script, and that is going to grab a bunch of files and then move those into our S3 bucket. So the first part, we're going to just grab the files. So wget. Okay, so we grab some files and we see them up in our directory there, that static-website zip up here. Now we want to unzip that. And then we're going to move to that directory. So we're going to cd to the static directory. And now what we want to do is we are going to move those files to our bucket. So what we need to do is we need to go back to our S3 instance and actually find out what our bucket name is. So we need this bucket name here. And then we're going to add that to our script. Okay, and so what that will look like when all is said and done. Oh, they're towing cars down below me here. Okay, so what we have is we have from the lab document, AWS S3 copy templates / cafe-app YAML, which is what we have right up when we unzipped it. We have that existing there, and we're copying it to the S3 bucket we created. And this is the name of the S3 bucket that we copied up here. And so how we found that is we went to our S3, we went to buckets, and then we went to the one that says create bucket, which is the one that's going to be defined with some random stuff, because remember, S3 buckets need to be unique globally. So we're grabbing that name, and then we're using that in our script. Okay, so this is one of those fun things that, okay, what did I do funky here? User provided path template cafe app. Oh, did I grabbed the wrong script? That would be why. Ha. Okay, let's go. That's what I tried pre-staging stuff, and I need to go back and grab this bucket name. I need the one that does the recursive. Sorry about that. Okay, so AWS S3 copy recursively to S3 create bucket and making it so it's public read. That's much better. Okay, so if we go back to our S3 bucket and we go to buckets, we go into our bucket, do a refresh. We have a directory structure now. We have an index.html. So we actually are going to have our website that is potentially functional there. So now what we want to do is we're going to go back to IO9. And now what we want to do is we're going to validate our template. We're going to run a couple commands. So first thing, we're going to change our directory structure. We're going to do cd .. /. So now we're in environment. And then now what we're going to do is we are going to validate our template. Okay, we validated our template. That's looking good. Now what we want to do is we're going to update this so we can actually use it. And again, here you need to make sure that here, see it is capital S3 and it is capital S3. And this is just one of those things in the lab is that first time they tell you to save the file, it looks like a lowercase s and a 3, but just keep it consistent with uppercase S and 3 and you'll be in a much happier place. Okay, no updates are to be performed. Okay. I get ahead of myself. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So I didn't actually can't do any updates because I didn't actually modify the S3 bucket. I have to do that first. Okay. So I definitely got ahead of myself. So part of what we have to do here is they take us out to a reference site and they say that we need to open a new browser tab, open the AWS CloudFormation template documentation for defining S3 bucket resources. This page, we go scrolling down to S3. We go to bucket. And then what we're looking for is going to be how to make a bucket or an S or we want to find out how to attach a deletion policy that'll retain the bucket. And so we want to look at the YAML. And what we want to look at is so we want this one, which is a static website. Deletion policy retain. Okay, that's the piece that we're looking for. So what we're wanting to do is we're going to change up some of our policy, because now we wanted that our IO9 that we need to add some more YAML here. So what we're going to do is we need to make it so that the deletion policy retains, and we're going to put some basic policies to do that. So we want to have it that it does, rather than just the type of our S3 bucket, we need to put some properties in there. Okay, and then property should be aligned with type. So that is one that in copying things in, sometimes things get a little weird. And then website should be aligned, index in, and delete policy should be aligned with S3 bucket, which it is. Okay, so now everything is aligned properly. Save that. Okay, so something in the YAML is not happy with. Like something. Looks like I had a slight error in my spacing. Save that. Okay, now it ran properly. So when it runs properly, you're going to get your nice JSON back here saying stack ID. I did some work. Things are working properly. So then what we did here is we're creating a resource, and we're creating an S3 bucket, and then we're giving it some properties and saying, okay, we want this to be able to serve static websites. So we're changing the first part, we just made an S3 bucket. Now we're doing a modification to that S3 bucket and saying, we want this to be a website. Remember when we created an S3 bucket way back when in one of our first labs, the things that you need to define is it needs to say what the index document is and what the error document is, and then the deletion policy of retain. So we'll save those. We ran them. That worked. Ran the validation. Okay. Now what we want to do is if we go to our CloudFormation and we look at this, one of the things that we're going to see is that it's not actually going to tell us any information about this because we don't have an output. So we do need to add a little bit more code to this. And that information page that we were looking at has that defined. And so for that, so what we're doing is we're adding an output, website URL, get the attribute from the S3 bucket website URL, and then it's going to bring that out. So we'll save that. Okay, that ran properly. Now what we want to do is we're going to validate our template. And so there's a validation tool. So we're going to change directories. And then we're going to run a validation check against it. Make sure it's actually a valid template. And it's coming back and saying, not finding s3.yaml. See that. They're saying we have a syntax error now. This is the fun thing about YAML, is you'll have some little error somewhere that it's cranky on, and then you have to go and hunt it down. Outputs should be aligned with resources. That it is. We now need to change directories, and that's why it's not finding it. I believe it might be what we have. Sorry, I got myself off script, and that's where we got in the weeds here. One thing that is a red herring in the lab, so it says to accomplish this task by adding as few as 4 lines of code. Totally ignore that because you're adding more than 4 lines of code, because that will definitely mess you up if you're trying to do it in 4 lines. Because you actually need at minimum 5, and then with the outputs, you're adding additional ones in more past that. Okay, so we got properties, deletion. S3 bucket, outputs. It's in the wrong place. Line resources. Yep. Description should be under value. Just like that. We need to track where the S3 YAML file is, which is up. Okay. Now we should be able to. That's better. Okay. So I had run a CD // to change directories, and I didn't need to at that point because I was actually in the right directory already. So that's why I wasn't able to run that. So the YAML was actually fine, which is what I was double checking, and it looked fine. It was just that it wasn't finding the file. Small minor problem. Okay, now that we know that the YAML code is good and it is properly syntaxed, now what we want to do is we want to update our stack. And so we're going to do a file formation, update stack name, create bucket, template, s3.yaml. And we had already run it before, so it's actually saying there's nothing to do because we've already done that. So let's go into our CloudFront. At CloudFront. Formation, sorry. Okay, so then we wanted to use the create bucket, and we wanted to make sure that there were some outputs. We have a website URL, because that's the output that last little piece of code that we put in here generates that website URL. So now that we have that, we can actually click on that and pull up our cafe website. And that's our validation point. Oops. And I just, oh, good. And I just blew up our IO9, so we're going to have to go back in there. Okay, good deal. Okay. So we got through that. So now we're going into challenge 2, new business requirement. They're like, okay, well, you did pretty good getting this basic stuff up, but we need more stuff. Team was impressed that we got that far. So impressed that Sophia configured the entire static website using a CloudFormation template. Given the success, the team went, okay, we're going to use infrastructure as a code more. We really like this stuff. This has some potential. So now it's the, okay, best practice is to store infrastructure as a code templates in some sort of a version control system. This is where Git's going to come into play. So they're asking Sophia to take on the challenge. Sophia talked to Mateo about the new business requirement. He stopped by the cafe and said, okay, we're going to use AWS code commit for this. It's basically a built-in Git environment within AWS for storing your code. So first thing we want to do is look at this code commit repository that's already been defined for us. So we're going to go into code commit, open that in another tab. And there's a repository already that's been built for us. It has a folder called templates and happens to have some starter templates that they're giving us. So we aren't going to have to create this YAML code from scratch. They're actually giving us some code to start with. So it's going to make us really happy campers so we don't have to play a lot in YAML, just a little bit. So now that we know the repository is there, we have our templates. We're going to want to actually use with those. So we want to look at the start lab YAML. And that's actually the one that the lab environment used when it initially built this lab for us. So these labs, when we start them, what they're using is they are using scripts in YAML to actually generate the lab environments for us from code, which makes a lot of sense, makes life a lot easier. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to take these repositories and we're going to want to actually utilize these. So we're going to go back to Cloud9. Just clear the screen so you can see what we're working on. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to clone that cloud commit repository. So what we want to do is, I skipped a step and I need to go back there. So we need to, in our cloud commit repository, this templates directory, we're going to want to clone the URL. So for the repositories, we'll go back here. Oops. Okay. Then we want to clone URL. We want to clone HTTPS. What that will do is that will give us the path of how to get here. And so then we'll want to save that in our text editor because we're going to need that in just a second. Okay, then we're going to go back to IO9. And then so what we're going to do is we're going to initially type git clone, and then we want to type the URL that we just grabbed. And so it's going to clone that repository into our local environment. Now you can see here the templates repository has been cloned locally. And there's those starter templates that we had. Then we're going to dive in a little bit. And we're going to change directory to that repository. And then we're going to do a git status. and saying, okay, everything is up to date. So everything is up to date in our current repository. We don't have anything new. But as we go forward, we're going to be able to put things into our Git repository and use that as our code repository and do our updates and our version control for all code we create moving forward. So now that we have the base repository set up, now we got to start playing with some of these templates and start building things out. So we're getting up to task. Let's see, task 3, using a continuous delivery service, network application layers for the cafe. There's no actual steps that you need to complete there. It's just the next step, we're going to create a new network layer with AWS CloudFormation, Cloud Commit, and Cloud Pipeline. We're going to take a lot of moving pieces and build stuff. So this is where it starts getting a little, we're going to have a lot of different screens we're going to be on. So I'll try and make sure I keep things straight for you guys. So this s3.yaml, we aren't going to worry about anymore. So we can close that. Should we save it first? Okay, so what we want to do first is we're going to go to our templates folder that we had. We want to go to the template.yaml, and we want to go to template1.yaml, right click, and we want to duplicate. And then we want to right click on the one that we created, which is template1.1.yaml, and we want to rename that. And we're going to rename that cafe-network. Be careful, because in the lab document it says cafe-network.yaml. So if you type cafe.network.yaml, your file will actually be called cafe-network.yaml.yaml. Hit enter once you've renamed it, and now it is called cafe-network.yaml. So just a word of warning, if you follow the directions explicitly, you'll have a YAML.yaml and then it won't work, and you'll have to just go, oh, it's misnamed. I did that the first time. So it is one that is easy to do, because if you're trying to follow along exactly explicitly how they have it documented, sometimes they put you in the weeds. Okay, so now we're going to open the network one we just created. You see all sorts of really fun looking YAML. Okay. And we're going to look at all the different things it's creating. It's creating an internet gateway here. It's creating a VPC to internet gateway connection. So this is basically doing all of our network layer information. Pretty cool stuff. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our AWS menu again. And we're going to open Code Pipeline this time. So we're going to go to Services and Code Pipeline. Open that in a new tab. This is where we're going to have like 10 tabs when we're done here. Okay, so now what we see is that there's 2 pipelines that were already created for us. So we aren't going to build the pipelines from scratch, but we're going to utilize those. But we're also seeing that they're both currently in a failed state, and that's because we haven't actually plumbed the pipelines with all the information in order for them to work. So they're set up, but they actually aren't going to be functional yet. So what we're going to need to do is we now need to make sure that we can configure it so that they actually have something to work with. So if we click on the Cafe Network pipeline, and then we go down here and we look at what it's needing to do, and we say, okay, the run change set, and we hit the information. Here we see that what it's using is the Cafe Network YAML. So that file is what this is actually going to utilize for when it's doing its work. And we haven't actually put that file into the production environment yet, so that's why it can't actually run. And then if we go back to pipelines and we look at the Cafe app pipeline, and that one is also going to have a YAML file that we haven't pushed up yet either. So those 2 files that we will be editing and creating are then going to be used by the pipeline to then first deploy the network and then deploy the applications. So you have the network pipeline and then the app pipeline. And this is that part I was talking about when I was going through the lecture about how we can chain things together. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is we're going to go back to IO9. So now that we have brought this cafe network in, what we want to do is we're going to actually make that one do some work for us. Why did my windows go weird on me? Okay, so what we're going to do is first we're going to do a get status. Okay, now it's saying that we have a new file. That file hasn't actually been added to our repository yet, so we need to do something. So first thing we're going to do is we want to add that file to our repository. This is getting back to one of your previous classes where you had get. So first you need to add it. And then once we've added it, we need to commit it. They're saying, yep, we want to actually make sure that we actually commit that, and then we'll do a get status again. And we're saying that, oops, come on. Clear. I'll do a status again. Okay, so now it's saying that your branch is ahead of by one commit. So now we need to do a push to make sure that we actually get things so that we're back in sync. So now we need to do a get push to push that file up to production. Okay, so now we push that up. So now if we go back to our code pipelines, and what we're going to see is it's going to take about 2 minutes for it to recognize that, oh, this file is here now, and I'm actually able to do some, or there was a change in the files. Because it basically goes, something was updated. So it'll rerun the pipelines once that file comes in. Takes a little bit. And this is probably the hardest one because you have to be patient. As long as Cloud9 shows that it was actually uploaded properly and you had done the validation check before, we should be good to go. Okay, now we're in progress. So now it's went, oh, there's some new code here. I need to actually do something with this code. So it's doing it in progress. And if we click on this, you can actually see that it's running. Oh, no, and it failed. I was worried we were going to get to this because it went too smooth in my demo. Oh, this is where this particular lab can get a little squirrely. Okay, so if something goes squirrely like this, usually what it is that we have something in the way that it got into it that it failed. So we want to go into the details link. Back to pipelines. Okay, it's not giving us as much information as that. I'm missing something. I'm trying to find it. Saying the run change set failed. Now let's see if, because what we might be running into. Okay, so it didn't. Sorry, I'm troubleshooting here and I'm not talking while I'm doing my troubleshooting. That's not good. So what I'm working through here is that what this particular code commit is going to do is it's going to build our VPC. And FA-number YAML. That looked good. We did the validation check and that was fine. And where did that go? Not liking something in our script. Even though our script passed validation. Always. Okay, I'm just going to redo that particular file. We didn't have it doing any mods to the file. Oh, actually we did. One little thing may have blown it up. I did not put the description in If it was something that small. Okay. Want to add the template. Edit. Push it. Factor code pipeline, watch your pipelines. I should pick that up in just a minute or two. We only do one edit on that file. And oh, that was what the null, that totally makes sense. That null error that we were seeing basically was saying that we can't have a null value for description. And that's why it wasn't letting the code run. Okay, we're in progress. It's a good sign. I was getting ahead of myself in the lab and missed one step. Okay, so something as simple as not putting the description into your YAML code can cause it to fail. And then when you try, but it did say that we were good and we were able to upload it. It's just it didn't run. And then it did give us that error that said null value is not allowed, but it didn't say what null value. And just happened to double check. Okay, so now that that one is working properly, now we can actually look at our VPC and we do a refresh. And now we have our cafe VPC that's been deployed using our script. So that worked. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our IO9. And we're going to play with some more YAML. So first we're going to do a git status. So everything, we're in sync with branch before we start. And so next thing we want to do is trying to make sure I'm okay. It's not everything that I did there. Pipeline, did all that. Okay, so now we want to update our network stack. So we have our base network stack, and now we want to do some modifications in it. And so what we need to do is we need to do some outputs, because right now, if we go into our code pipeline and we go to our cafe network pipeline, oops, nope. There we want to go to CloudFormation. Sorry, the wrong place. Let's go to CloudFormation. And then we have the update cafe network. Yep. And then outputs. And currently we don't have any outputs. So we ran this particular job because like when we ran the complete create bucket job earlier, it had an output that gave us the website URL. For our stack, when we create our update cafe network, we want to have an output that actually gives us the information about the network, so that we can use that for additional pipelines that are coming up. So we need to add some stuff to our script. So we're going to modify our cafe-network YAML. And what we want to add in there is we're going to add some output. So it actually gives us additional information about the network itself. Again, the lab document, if you try doing a straight copy and paste, it's going to throw extra spaces in. So ideally take it into a different text editor. Make sure that you get rid of any extra spaces. And then we'll drop this in. And we're going to drop one extra space there. Okay, so outputs needs to be all the way left justified. And so it should be lined up with what the public subnet is up top. And so we want to be all the way to the left. And then public subnet should be in 2. And then description, that is also going to be in 2 from there. Value should be at the same place as description. Reference should be in 2 from there. Export should be lined up in the same place where value is. Name should be in 2 from export. And FN should be in 2 from name. Then we go down to VPC ID. VPC ID should be lined up with publication. Description should be in 2 from there. The value should be in at the same place as description. Reference in 2 from value. Export should be in at the same as value. Name 2 in from export. And FN sub in 2 from name. Okay, once you have it to that point, save it. File, save. And then what we're going to want to do is we need to, so if we do a get status, it's going to say, okay, we got changes in our file. We aren't in sync. So what we need to do first is we need to do an add. And then we need to do a commit. And then we need to do a push. Since we just did a change, when we go to our cloud formation stacks, it's not that. We wanted code pipeline and go to our pipelines. We will now see that we're going to get an update that's going to come through in just a minute. Because we did an update, but this one's going to go pretty quick. Okay, in progress. Oh no, it failed. Why did it fail? Let's find out why it failed and see if it gives us any better information this time. Public subnet. Proxy null. Let's see if we can figure out what happened there. And it's most likely that we got something that's not. So the only thing is we know it was working before we went down and put our outputs in. And so it should be outputs. So we're in 2 for public subnet. We're in 2 from there for description. Same place for value, in 2 for ref. Export. Name is in 2. FN sub is in 4. VPC ID should be lined up with public sub, which is description in 2, value 2, ref. Okay, so and commit. There should be one that it runs really quick if it works. Because we're only adding outputs. I think what my problem was is I didn't have outputs all the way to the left. And that's where things got squirrely on it. As you can see, troubleshooting YAML is so much fun. Progress. Come on, you can do it. Okay, so what it was is that I didn't have outputs all the way to the left. As I thought I did, but I actually was 2 spaces off. So that my whole chunk here was 2 spaces off. And because of that and it being YAML, it went, yeah, no, this isn't going to work. So if we go back to CloudFormation stacks and we go to our update cafe network and we go to outputs now, we now are showing that it created a public subnet and we have our VPC ID. So we have the information that we need to be able to get to the next step. Okay, so now that we know that is working, what we want to do now is we're going to go and we need applications because we're going, okay, we got a network working, but we need stuff because the network doesn't do us a whole lot of good unless we have actual additional things in there. So let's get into, I got all sorts of extra screens open. So let's pull down to, yeah, we'll pull down just those 2. Okay, so we're done for the moment with our cafe network YAML. So we save that, we can close that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to define the actual application resources. So we're going to go to template 2, right click, duplicate, and then the 2.1 we're going to rename. So right click, rename, and we're going to call this one cafe-app. And again, don't type .yaml because then you'll have .yaml.yaml. Double click on it to open it. Okay, so now here we're going to have to do some editing. So we're going to need to do a couple things. This one, they did give us a description, so yay, we aren't going to have that error again. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to define the types of instances that we can choose when we're actually deploying our EC2 instances. So what they have is they're sending us to some more AWS documentation and how to do this. And so what we'll do is we'll go out to the documentation and I'll pull that over. Oops, it's not the one I wanted. Okay, so what we want to do is they're saying that we're going to want to define what type of instance we want. And for a change, rather than having to dive down and go deep in the page, we're going, okay, this is exactly what we want to do. Because they're saying that we want to have a parameter that gives us the option to select our instance type, which is this is doing, having a default and having allowed values, and then it has a description afterward. Cool, it's giving us exactly what we want, just not the particular types where we're gonna have to do some modifications on those. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna then grab this and then we're gonna bring that over to our IO9 and then it's gonna be in our parameters section. So what we wanna do is Oh, yes, there's a whole nother step that I passed over really quickly that I shouldn't have. Okay, so first thing we have to do is we have to actually create an EC2 instance. And so we're going to use the documentation on how to do that as well. So what we need to do is under our resources currently, it's going to create a security group. And it's in a region and everything else. So what we need to do is, let's see. Yeah, we're wanting to create a cafe instance. Okay. I feel like I missed a step here and I'm just trying to make sure I get caught up. Okay. Yeah, I got ahead of myself. So the first part we're doing is the parameters. The second part we're going to do is the actual instance. So the first part we're doing is parameters, and we're going to want to put that under our cafe network parameter up here. So we're going to put it after that section. And we're going to, from our documentation, this is going to be a instance type parameter. And we need to define the parameter as well. So we're going to go back in here. And so we'll do this after our cafe network parameter. There's space in there. And then we're going to bring across and modify what we have over here. So here we have the parameter, instance parameter, type string, default T2 micro, allowed values. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bring that across. I'm bringing in one that already has all the information. But when you bring this one across, you're going to have to change the default from T2 micro to T2 small. You're going to change the M1 small to T2 small, the M1 large to T3 micro. You're going to add a T3 small, and then you're going to change the descriptions to match. So what you will have when you're done here is the default T2 micro, allowed values, T2 micro, T2 small, T3 micro, and T3 small. And then the description, enter T2 micro, T2 small, T3 micro, or T3 small. Default is T2 small. So we got that defined in there. Good. Now we're going to go to another documentation page. And in this one, we need to find out how to build an EC2 instance using a script. And so we want to create an EC2 instance using script. This is the one we have to scroll down. And what it's asking is, we're going to have one that we're going to set up that the logical ID is set to cafe instance, includes an image ID for the instance type, reference the instance type parameter that we defined earlier for key name. So it has a lot of pieces, and what I'm going to do is let's pull up a text editor. Okay. Those of you following along, here is all the different pieces that you're pulling together from this page. So what we're doing is we're doing a cafe instance, type AWS EC2 instance, properties, image ID, reference latest AMI ID, which is what we created in that earlier step. Instance type, referring to the instance type parameter. Key name. Instance profile is cafe role, and all these other steps. So this is basically a shortcut, all the information that you need to put in here. Because this is one of those that they sort of send you on a fishing expedition where you have to get a lot of different pieces in order to make this work. And that just made it a little easier. Where this is going to go in is it's going to go under resources and before outputs. So we'll put a space in there, and it will be 2 in from the left margin. See if that plays nice. Said it didn't. Okay, let's try that again. There we go, went in right. So this is another one that spacing is going to be important. So where this should be starting is 2 in from the left. And so we defined our cafe instance. And then all the other settings associated with it that we found in here, and then customized to our specific instance, which is in the lab, where it defines that. And then the last piece that we are going to add in is they give us some text for the user data, which we're going to customize our instance so that we can actually have the web server do everything we need it to. And this is another one you're going to probably want to copy and paste it into a text editor to clean it up from bringing it in their Canvas environment, because it's going to throw all sorts of extra spaces in there. So ideally, when you get it entered properly, the user data should be aligned with tags up here, as that's where it's going to want to be aligned for your left justification. And then FN is in 2, sub is in 2, and then all of the particular scripts that are going to run on the Linux server are in 2 from there. And then we leave 1 space between that and the outputs. Okay, so now that we have all that in, we want to do a file save. And then they give us a validation tool, which is really nice, so that before trying to run it in the C and then have it blow up on the other side when we're actually trying to provision it, we can actually do a syntax check right now and say, okay, is this actually valid code? Which makes things a whole lot easier before we actually do it. Sometimes it's annoying because then you do go, oh, why is it not valid? If it's valid, it comes back and gives you the JSON and says, okay, it looks good. So now that we got that, then what we need to do is we're going to do our git commands to actually move this up. And so what we're going to need to do is we have a new file. And our new file is called, where'd it go? Cafe app YAML. So the first thing we need to do is we are going to, well, we can do a couple things. We can do a git status, which will say, okay, we have a new file that is not currently in sync. Okay, so the first thing you have to do with the file with git is you need to add it. So we're going to do a git add, and then we need to use that particular file name. So git add templates cafe-app YAML. Once we've done the add, then we need to do a commit. So we're doing a git commit -m initial commit of cafe app templates / cafe-app YAML. So in the lab itself, it just basically says use the same steps you did before using Git to upload this. So this is one that it doesn't actually give you the steps like it did the first round. And then once we have it committed, last step is we push it. Okay, it's been uploaded. So now we can go back to our cloud formations. We want to go to code pipeline. And our code pipeline is then going to run this cafe app pipeline, because we haven't run that one successfully before because we didn't actually have the cafe app.yaml defined. So now that we have that defined, if everything plays nice, this is going to then actually generate everything that we need for the cafe application. If this works, we might actually get this just under the bell today. We'll see. So while that's going, we're going to get into EC2. Don't get that up anymore. What we need is I need a don't need cloud formation. Let's go to EC2. Instances. Yeah, cafe web server is initializing. We do have our public IPv4 address. Yay. I can actually copy that. Once our site is functional, as long as this actually works. Haha, it succeeded. I have the right address. Did, but it's still initializing. So server's not quite up. Okay, cafe is up. Yay. Okay, so everything that we've done so far is functional. We're in a good place. And now what we want to do is they're going, awesome, you've been able to do all this. Now we want to duplicate it to another region. And it's like, okay. But that's actually, compared to everything else we've done, pretty darn easy. So what we want to do in Cloud9 is we are going to run a command to duplicate the cafe network to another region. So we're going to just run a script to move it over to Oregon. So let's do a clear. We don't need that up anymore. We'll move this up because most everything we're going to do here. Okay, so we're going to run this script. Okay, and it's JSON. So then when it comes back, it says, okay, I did what you asked. And then we want to go to CloudFormation. And we're going to change our region. So we want to go to Oregon. And then look at that. We got a update cafe network create in progress. Just need to wait till that gets to a complete. That's going. We're going to want to get a VPC up in Oregon region. Yeah, cafe VPC is up. Code pipeline succeeded, which it did. Good deal. Now what we need to do is create a EC2 key pair, and it's going to be called Cafe Oregon. So we're going to need to pull up EC2 for the Oregon region. Open that in a new tab. Key pairs. Create a key pair. We're going to call that Cafe Oregon. Create the key pair. That was generated. Now we need to go back and modify our application template. Going back to Cloud9, we want to go to our application, so Cafe App YAML. And what we'll notice is they actually already had predefined for us under region map that key pair, cafe.oregon is what we use if we're doing in the Oregon key. So basically going, okay, we don't have to change that, but if you were building this, you would be adding this there after you generated the key pair. So all those parts are set. So now what we're going to want to do is we want to copy the template file to Oregon, and we want to copy it to the repo bucket name in Oregon. So what we need to do is we need to go to S3. And again, S3 is not regional. S3 is global. And we want to look at our repo bucket, which is our repository bucket. And then what we want to do is for a repo bucket, we need to get the repo bucket name. And so what we need is the repo bucket name. At copy that. 9. And then the script that we're going to run is going to copy the templates from the cafe.yaml to that repo bucket. Because what we're going to do is, because S3 is global, we're going to have it that we can actually do deployments from this template in S3 rather than having the template living in a specific region. Okay, so we uploaded those to S3. So then if we look at S3, there's S3 buckets, go into our repo bucket, refresh, there's our cafe app. Okay, so our cafe app.yaml script is now there. So now we're going to use that script to actually generate a stack. So we're going to go into CloudFormation. And then we want to make sure we're in the Oregon region, which we are. And then we are going to create a stack with existing resources, import resources. Or actually, sorry, with new, doesn't say. New resources. Okay, and then what we're going to do is that same URL that we just had is what we're going to do. So what we want is the object URL from S3. So what we need to do is we're going to go to S3. S3. Make sure we're in that repo bucket. So when I was in there before, I skipped a step and I should have just done it while we were there before. Okay, so here is our cafe app.yaml. We click on that. And then what we want is the object URL. So we'll copy that. Go back to our create stack, and then we'll just paste that in. So what we're doing is before we uploaded the YAML files when we were doing this, now it's just pointing it to an S3 bucket location that it can actually grab the file it needs. We're selecting next. And our stack name, we're going to say Cafe West. And next. And then we also, oh, sorry, not next. We're going to go to our instance type parameter. And remember when we built that little piece that said we could select? Now this is where we can actually do the select, and for this particular one, we want a T3 micro. And we'll select next. And we will submit. Create is in progress. And while that's going, we're going to go to an EC2 bucket. That here. Oregon though. Okay, so that was completed. So now in Oregon, we would just want to go to EC2. Look at our instances. We have our Cafe web servers initializing. Grab our public IP address. Another browser window. As soon as that instance comes up fully, it's not quite there yet. It's initializing. It's getting there. And we have our cafe now on the East Coast or West Coast in Oregon. We've taken everything that we did, and then we're able to leverage that to deploy everything over to the West Coast in one fell swoop with 2 scripts. A little bit of script magic here. And then lastly, we created a stack using our S3 bucket. And that's the lab. So lots of moving parts. What type of questions do you guys have, if any? I know what one question you guys have before that's why you're all still hanging out here. There we go.
What's the attendance code? Oh.
I was gonna say, I know what you have for the question. What is the attendance code of the day? Looney Tunes, but Lunny instead of Looney.